Well, welcome to another Cafecito conversation. And we're just delighted to be joined today by Guzman. And we're going to be sharing with you our thoughts on the newly formed Mosaic Affinity Group organization. So we're going to have a little coffee together, at least virtually. And it's just a blessing to be with you today, Christine. So go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how you came about to be part of the Latinx newly formed association.
Yes, hi. Thank you for having me. It's so fun to be here and be a part of this. So my name is Christine Guzman. I am currently the Title IX coordinator with Student Affairs, and I've actually been here at APU since 2004. I started off as an adjunct faculty member and then full-time faculty, and then I moved over to Student Affairs to do this role as a Title IX coordinator. So this group, this affinity group that recently started is really exciting because, as you know, Richard, in all the years that I've been here, we haven't had a group that was designated for the Latinx community. You know, there's so many of us that share an identity and have common ground and goals. And I knew people that, you know, in this department or in these programs, but we never really had a group of Latinx, Hispanic identifying people come together in a formal group. So when I heard about this, I thought I have to be a part of it because this is something that is really an answer to prayer. Because I try to start my own groups, like luncheons with other Latinas or, you know, ways to connect. But, you know, it's hard when you're just kind of doing it on your own. So to have this formal group is really exciting for me.
Yes. Well, we're blessed that you're part of the group. And not only that, but you're one of the leaders. And you are co-chairing the Latinx group with Carmen Varela.
Yes.
And so there are many different questions I have for you today. So first of all, you mentioned why it's so important to have this network.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell someone who isn't familiar with affinity organizations and who might be asking a question that often we hear from a majority culture group about why are you guys separating from everybody and why do you need your own group? What would you tell somebody about why this is so important to have affinity groups?
Well, you know, I would say to that, you know, and I just heard a podcast with Brene Brown, and she was interviewing someone, Emmanuel, and he's a former NFL player. And the conversation, and it really resonated with me because I was thinking about today's interview. And what I would say to that is, you know, when you have a designated group as Latinx or African American or Asian, you have to have these descriptors because they don't exist. So all the other groups are based on a white dominant normative. And it's not saying anything against white people, if you will, but that's the association, that's the culture that we're in, that's what's considered the normative in our culture. So we had to create, you know, minoritized people have had to create groups or spaces where we share a common ground. And the affinity group actually provides this space for us. So when you have a group of people who are minoritized and historically don't have a voice, by bringing us all together, we have one collective voice. And we are able to come together to foster awareness and inclusion and make it known to the university as a, you know, as a whole that, hey, there's a group of people here who have important things to say, and we just want to share it together in one voice. So
Right.
why don't you have a listen?
Oh, this is fantastic. So common ground for a common voice. So as you know, Christine, we're in the midst of a strategic planning process this year. Many different working groups and a vision that is being formulated as we speak for the future. So as you think about common ground for a common voice as it relates to not only affinity groups, but also people of color, students of color, faculty and staff of color at APU, common ground for a common voice, what does that look like sitting at these different tables as we then begin to be more representative of a changing demographic at Azusa Pacific? What might that look like for us as we move ahead collectively?
Yeah, good question. Well, I would say that, when we come together, we have, and as you said, the group is very new. So really, we're at a place where we're just trying to kind of find our feet. And, there's so much on our plate, right? There's so much that we want to accomplish. So we kind of have to take the sieve and kind of just shake it a little bit and see, what sticks to the top. And I would say as we are in these different groups, and I've sat in several different groups and I'm a part of some, but we really want to look at, is the language that we're using in our syllabi, in our statement, in our the way we measure academic success and the way we measure leadership, is it all inclusive? Or is there an unconscious bias, or is there an unconscious assumption that this is the way success looks? And so I think by bringing these groups together, we're able to, you know, talk about, well, this is what success looks like. Here are some, like right now, I'm doing research on community cultural wealth. And what we're looking at are a group of students who come in with all of these strengths. As as a people, Latinos have this history of rising to the top, fighting against adversity, working hard, sense of community and family. All of those are very important aspects to having, you know, a university where everybody feels included. And so culture or community will look different, to a different group of folks. So I think, when you have these affinity groups, it's saying, hey, this is what community looks like for us. This is the best way that I think you'll capture the talents and the gifts of the people that are in your community. Um, does that answer your question?
Yes. So part of not only being part of the community already, but it's part of finding that voice within the larger community. And finding that voice, Christine, is still resonating with me because as a Latino male, as a Latina, within our Latinx culture, we haven't always had a voice, or our voices have either been drowned out, or maybe we've been kind of, I don't want to say passive, Christine, but maybe we've been kind of in the background so often that you have to learn even how to find a voice. So what you're saying is so important within the context of an organizational culture, finding the voice, finding that common ground, and then being able to move ahead and weaving that through like this new strategic plan. So, Christine, back to voice again. You're one of the key leaders of our Latinx group, and you are co-chairing with another Latina, Carmen Varela.
Yeah, she's wonderful.
So this is wonderful.
Yeah.
So from a Latina perspective, what does voice look like? Not only within the affinity group that is forming our Latinx group, but what is the Latina voice for you and for Carmen moving forward as this group forms, but also as we go out into the larger structure of APU?
First thing that comes to mind as you're asking that question is that our voices are heard, considered. It's one thing to be in these spaces of leadership, but it's something else when you speak that others hear you, and that your suggestions, that your expertise are considered as valid, and important and vital. Not just valid, but vital to the community. I think as women have been stepped over for centuries. We finally have our first woman as vice president for our country, and this is huge. And again, first Black woman, Asian identifying woman. We've never had that, so there is that descriptor again, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's never been done. So in having these spaces for our affinity group and having that voice, I think it's just being invited and given key roles to implement change. Um, we have a framework of what leadership looks like, I think, in our westernized setting. But I think with hearing the voices from others who haven't been historically in the leadership positions, it means scrapping maybe some of the ideas that you have. It means like recreating like what pedagogies that haven't been questioned before. So I think when we start to see clear, visible changes in the outcomes, right? Because the data doesn't lie, it's always about the outcomes. I think that that's when I know that, what, we've made progress. Like to have this group as a start is, to me, is evidence of, okay, there's some progress. We finally have gotten some folks together, and we now have a valid space. So I think when you start to see outcomes that reflect the people that are within the community, I think then we are probably moving in the right direction.
There you go.
We're starting.
So, so outcomes-based approaches to not just validation of, say, a Latinx group, but also being able to measure what we're doing and the effectiveness of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so as a researcher, because you're in the midst of research right now,
Mm-hmm.
how might not only your research, but future research help to continue to build our foundation for people of color, for the Latinx community, for finding our voices and sitting at the table? What are some of your researcher thoughts as you move forward and you help us vision this future at APU?
Mm-hmm. Gosh, so much. So to keep it simple, part of what I want to do with the research that, as I'm right now, I'm collecting data, I'm coding, the work I'm doing is qualitative. And so what I will do is, when you find out what works and what doesn't work, or what are some keys to the success of our undergraduate students, then these results, it's so important to get these results to the decision makers. It's not enough to get it. It's basically, I'm saying we need to get what we find, our scholarship, Latino scholarship, Latinx scholarship, needs to be in the hands and the minds of the decision makers and the people who have the money, because really that's where it's at. The decision makers and the money and the policy making. And so I would love to see, and I'm not privy to what, our board has or does not have, but I would love to see information, policies and decisions being made from our board, from our legislators, from folks that make the decisions about what it means to be a thriving student body for everyone. Our student body, our demographics are more diverse than they've ever been. And this is such an opportunity to capture the needs of our students, of our, particularly our Latinx students. And but they don't know unless we talk about it. They don't know
Right.
unless our scholarship is printed and talked about and referenced and cited and everything else. So that's what I think. We get it to the decision makers, the policy makers, the people who hold the big wallets, and then let's start making changes, which means we need to have more Latinas and Latinx folks on these boards, on policy, these decision makers. So
There you go. Representation matters. Yes, representation matters, and also data
absolutely,
matters. And
absolutely.
being able to get that important information from your research and other research on the Latinx community to the decision maker.
Hmm.
And there's a little twist to that too, Christine, and maybe it's even beyond our purview in this conversation. So my question is not going to come out very articulate right now, but
Hmm.
so there's a continuum, if you will, and I'm thinking of it kind of like an assembly line. I don't know where this is going, Chris, but you're a researcher. You are collecting data. You have your hypotheses, and you're gathering information. You're putting it into, you're validating your results, and as a result, it is then culminating in the research that can go to the decision makers. How do you get decision makers to not only listen, but implement? And what is compelling, maybe even initially for you, and even coming out of your research of what you're reading, what are some compelling themes that may be emerging now that will get the attention of decision makers in order to impact change? So are there glimmers of those themes emerging for you?
Um, One of the things that comes to mind is, we're coming, God willing, towards the end of this pandemic, and we're starting to open up. We have had a year to rethink higher education. We've had a year to figure out, not only, I mean, once we got over being in crisis mode, but we've had a year to see like the outcomes of what works and what does not work for students from all backgrounds. And I feel like now is the time to make changes. We can't go back to the way it used to be. We need changes now. We need to rethink what student success looks like. Does it mean doing more, for those who can't, who have families and who necessarily can't be on campus? Well, now that we have virtual spaces, maybe now everything doesn't need to be, 9 to 5, or only having student events, at certain times a day. I don't know. I'm just kind of brainstorming with you,
Yes, yes.
but I feel like right now is such an important time to rethink how higher ed can be different, because you know what, where the numbers are, that's what matters. If we don't have students sitting in desks or in the classroom, we don't exist. We're like one of the, I mean, I'll say this in terms of higher ed in general, but when you think about companies that market towards certain demographics, they get what the population wants. They want to be able to bring what, there's, that saying, give the people what they want. And that isn't really done in higher ed, not regularly. I mean, some places probably do, but we don't ask our population what they need or what works for them. And now I feel like we're at a place where we can find out what our students need. For example, to go to your question about my research, what I'm finding now is that family is such a huge part of success or no success or minimal success. And what, and I had a participant say, one of the things that would be so helpful is if my parents understood why I can't go to my cousin's birthday party, or why I can't be a part of a certain event. If they knew what it takes and why I'm spending 6 hours in a certain subject, maybe they might understand that I'm not turning my back on my family. So there's things that I think we could maximize when it comes to addressing the needs of our Latinx students. Um, and so that's what I'm hoping to see. That I guess once we know, like I'm excited to see what I find out, and I can't wait to share it with you when I'm done. But I really think it will be helpful in keeping our students in mind as decisions are made.
So maximize the learning to
Mm-hmm.
create these environments in which, as a Latino male, as a Latina coming into APU, that I feel not only am I in a place that I feel there's potential for me, but that they'll have support.
Right.
Doing a little bit of a role play out there now. If I put on my Latino hat or my Latina hat, and you're mentoring me as a new student, a first generation student, and this is kind of like maybe like in a couple years where we're actually putting things into place at APU, what might you be telling me are support pieces that are in place now that will help me succeed?
Mm-hmm.
Be programs, but it could be just, organizational culture that has shifted at APU. What ideally would you be sitting down with me to tell me as a student coming into APU to help me be successful?
I've mentored students for years, and mostly first gen Latinas, and um, and what I would say, and it's even based on my own experience, is find a buddy. Honestly, like when you think of cohorts, I'm in a cohort now, and we are like the ones that get it, right? We're the ones that share what it means to be up all night writing chapter 2. We're the ones that share getting through a statistics course, when you haven't taken one in 20 years. So I would say find, like, so with the students, like often what I've said is really explaining what office hours mean, because it's scary. If you've never been on a college campus, I know for me, when I was in college, I can't even, I think maybe I had a professor say, you need to be in my office at this time. And that was the only reason why I started going. And then I realized, oh, this is helpful. I'm not bothering them. I'm not being an imposition. Because when we think of our community, we don't want to put others out. We don't want to be a burden. That's just kind of the way we think sometimes. So I would say find, go to your professors who have the office hours. Find one that can resonate with you. Again, going back to representation. That's why it's so important to have African American and Black professors, because you want somebody who looks like you, who can identify with you. I would say, I would, there are mentoring programs. I would say, see if you can find one. The students that I have were already in formal mentoring programs, but even those, when I would work with social work students, I would just take them under my wing and say, okay, let's talk, let's have coffee, let's have lunch, let's talk about what you want to do. So really, relationship is key. I think a long way of answering the question is, I would say, relationship is key, whether it's with people who are teaching in front of the classroom or those who are in your classroom. Or even somebody outside of the university who somebody from your church. Really, it's all about relationship.
So you've really brought it full circle. It's all about relationships. And so I'll ask a similar question in closing. What would you tell someone who's looking for whether it's Latinx affinity group or that you're leading right now with Carmen, or one of the other affinity groups? What would you tell them as a reason to join?
Because you have a voice that matters, And I think if you want your ideas heard, find some people who you share values with, who you share common ground with. I would say there's strength in numbers. Um, yeah, and I would say take an opportunity to be a leader. And I would always encourage somebody, to be um, that big fish in a small pond. That's where, I mean, that's what's worked for me. You find spaces that are valuable and important to you, and you become well versed in it, and then people start to listen, and then it creates opportunity.
Well, thank you for your leadership, Christine, and thank you for your influence, and thank you for your connections that you make and the relationships you make with others. And thank you for this Cafecito conversation with us today. Blessings to you always, and don't be a stranger. Let's have another conversation soon.
Yes, let's meet again soon.
Okay. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.